which connects back to when you said that entrepreneurship and, it's a luxury.
When I'm listening to you, I'm wondering how on earth is she gonna give me my money back? In order for you to chase unicorns, you will need to have a very, very generous wallet. Everything goes back to the investment thesis, but the investment thesis needs to have a correlation with the resources that you are having.
What would you tell them about planning their exit strategy? And how early should they be thinking about it?
There are 9 ways of exiting companies, and in so many different ways that you as a founder can offer investors to exit.
How did you make that money? And for somebody who's just starting, how do they become an investor?
Great question.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to She Talks Business. Today on the show, we have with us Maria Carolina. Let's dive straight in. Hi, Maria. How are you today?
Very good. And you?
I'm good myself. It's interesting. We had another podcast recording right before Maria came in. And she happened to know the lady that was on the show before us. It's such a small world. And we just found out that our kids go to the same school.
Exactly. A small world.
Small world.
Completely. Yeah.
So happy to have you on the show today, Maria. And I'll dive straight in. I've seen your career. It's super, super interesting what you're doing. And I see that you're an early investor. Tell me, what is an early investor and how do you do it?
So I'm originally from Colombia. As you can see, I have a name and an accent. I started in the world of the startup around 2009. First in Colombia, when it was the first startup, raising funds was very tough. Mm-hmm. And then I thought that was just an inherent problem of emerging countries. Then afterwards, I went to France, and then I was part of another startup. And again, raising funds was extremely tough. So when I moved to Switzerland, finally, I said, I want to be on the other side of the equation. I had a little bit of money because of some exits and everything. And so I would like now to actually understand how to support those entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit of how it started. And then I had the luck, literally, to meet very interesting people who had a lot of experience about angel investing. One of them, Brigitte Baumann, and then we started a business angel network that was simply to invest in a startup. So, in a very simple way, what is it? What is an angel? We have 2 wings. One is the wing, yes, of the money in the moment that the startup is facing a lot of risk, and of course, there's no banks that will lend money. Or maybe the venture capitals will come, but it's too early for them. So that's a little bit of one wing. And the other wing, which I think is the most important one, is more than money. The startups need at that very early stage smart money. Meaning, like, it's not that we are super smart, no, but we come with network and we come with a little bit of background and experience. So in a nutshell, that's precisely what is an angel investing. So it's the wing of the money, and the other side is the wing of the skills, the background, but most importantly, to open our networks. So to support the challenges that these startups will be facing in an early stage of life.
Interesting. And I'm going to be super awkward now and just straight up ask you, how did you make that money? And for somebody who's just starting, how do they become an investor?
Great question. So at the very beginning, I thought only this extremely wealthy people can actually invest in a startup because it's super risky. It's an asset class that is as risky as investing in junk bonds.
Yeah.
However, part of the learning was that when you do it in a group, you can start with $5,000, $10,000 at the very beginning. You meet with other individuals, you pool resources. Normally we call that you do syndication vehicle. And then we are few of us, and then we can get up to a ticket of 50,000, 100,000, or even $1 million, as we did in Switzerland. So that's the first myth that people is like, oh, but is this only for the very wealthy? It is not. Mm-hmm. Of course you need some money, and of course it's so risky that I always say to the people, listen, it cannot be the money of your mortgage. It can't be the money of the education of the kids. It literally needs to be those resources that you are in peace to lose, but at the very end that you can learn a lot. And the last piece that I always say to many individuals when they are hesitant to start or not is like, how much do you pay nowadays for executive education course? Mm-hmm. It's actually between 5,000, 10,000 in a very good institution, 15,000 only for 5 days. Well, another way for me to learn from different sectors have been precisely investing in the startups that actually is in the sector that I'm interested to learn. So it's also from an executive education perspective that can do it. So that let's say is the first part of the answer. The second is, how do we make money? Because it's true, if you're going to lose it, like what's the difference between charity, philanthropy, or any other? So it's called the portfolio approach. Example, I see a startup, which I like, and it's, let's say they are raising a pre-seed round. And then I would like to come in, but the risk is so high because, they haven't most likely proven the product market fit. They are literally trying to understand who's the ideal customer profile. So there are so many uncertainties that normally what I will do, example, and that's how I do it, is if I'm going to allocate 50,000 to that startup, what I do is I look others to syndicate, the concept that I mentioned before. And I start at the very beginning only with 5,000. But of course, I make sure that at least we are 50,000 or 100,000 together. And then I leave some funds for the follow-on rounds, because this startup will need between 6 to 8 financing rounds before exiting, meaning before they can give the money back to investors. And then they will need a lot of money. So a way of doing so is you start with a small ticket. Is the best time to learn, to literally know well the team. What I always say is their true due diligence. And then afterwards, you invest part of that money that you have saved for follow-on rounds. And that's a little bit how you do it. And of course, because the other part that is not only risky, but is lengthy. So each time that as an angel you decide to invest in a startup, I know that the time frame for exiting, meaning that I could see any return on investment, would be between 3, 5 to 7 years, depending on the sector. There's only 2 times that I have invested in biotech, and it has taken me 12 years to see the return on investment. So those are, let's say, important notions to understand.
And how do one chooses a startup? How do you manage those portfolios?
First of all, where to find the startups. Yeah. And that's why, number one question, I never do it before having, let's say, a footprint. So when we started in Switzerland, we had a big network, and then you start literally going to the universities. So EPFL, ETH said that they have literally their scientific parks. You go there, you start to get to know the entrepreneurs and so on, and then you source from them. For example, I wanted to become an impact investor because I was coming, when I was doing the startup in Colombia, the ones that we were doing was in EdTech. So I really wanted to move forward in that one. And then I made the mistake that, I found a startup. I didn't have any antenna there or anyone that actually, more than following up, someone that could help. And then, it was kind of catastrophe. I lost my money, and then on top of that, I couldn't add value to that startup. So one recommendation is always try to look for deal flow. There are many places to look for deal flow, accelerator programs, any award competitions globally they have. Yeah. For example, here in the UAE, Hub 71, Techstars, so many others that they can actually, there's a curation of that deal flow where you can access that one. So I think that's number one. The second, this is a trust business and a people's business. Even after doing this for the past literally 12 years of my life, I always do it with others. I'm never doing it by myself. If it's a warm introduction or a referral of someone that I trust, of course, that will be going in number one. A referral of a startup that I have invested in, I always pay attention to the founders whenever they ask me, like, listen, I have seen someone like terrific. If I were in your shoes, definitely, time to invest in this individual. So that's the second one. The third one, of course, if you had the opportunity, and we have seen companies that we have exited, and then immediately the founders, you start seeing like a period of time where they literally take a break, and in 2 years' time they start again the adventure. You want to go with that serial entrepreneur, and it's not because, again, going back to risk, is that individual has done it in the past. No one can guarantee that he or she will succeed. But what is true is that they have done it. And from a personal bias perspective, this is a lot of psychology. This is more an art than a science. So from the personal bias perspective, it gives you peace of mind. Okay, that individual has already achieved it in the past. And that's why my recommendation to founders, this is a sales process. Communication matters. Be in the radar. So you need to feel comfortable being out. And many of them, especially the super tech ones, they're like, no, forget it. I'm just into my product or my technology. I don't want to do any sales. I don't want to be in any marketing. I don't want to go out. And I'm like, well, the product, most important than your product, is you. So either you or your co-founder, definitely that would be something that is important for you guys to actually feel comfortable doing. Or if not comfortable, open to learn how to network, open to learn how to exactly brand yourself. And then how do I manage those portfolios? And it's normally, we do an investment thesis. So every year, so like the same resolutions for New Year's Eve, you review and you say, okay, which of the companies are, let's say, closer to exit, which have died. So then when you analyze all of that, I normally say, okay, I always allocate the amount of money that I am going to spend or invest in the year. And then I say, okay, are 4, and I will not say 4 startups, but what I say is 4 rounds, which means they can be new startups, and many others are literally those follow-on rounds that I left behind so that I can support the other startups. And I must say that being part of an angel network helps a lot, because there's always someone who's actually, let's say, it's called a lead leader, that is all the time close to the startup and will give, let's say, the reporting. Like every quarter, we will understand where the startup is, what are the challenges, what are the needs. So that's mainly a little bit of how the entire thing, like alone is too tough. So
Super
number one is do it collectively.
Power of community.
Power of community.
Very interesting.
Exactly.
And then when we say, okay, we're calculating the returns, what do you mean by that in your ecosystem?
Let's say in an ideal world, as an angel, you are expecting what we call 5x, meaning 5 times the capital that you invested in a time frame between, again, going back to how far or how close are the startups for exiting, that it could be exactly a 5x in 5 to 7 years. It's a very good investment.
Talk to me about hyper growth and how it might not be for all the investors. Not everybody wants a unicorn, right? And a lot of founders now are more focused towards, let's say, sustainability and profitability. How do you see that?
There has been this, let's say, evolution. That everyone was chasing unicorns. And again, it depends on the wallet that you have. In order for you to chase unicorns, you will need to have a very, very generous wallet in many startups at the same time, in many follow-on rounds for doing so. For example, as angels, we normally, or at least myself, I go for a mid-tail exit. That is, I'm not going towards the unicorns, like amazing if they can make it, but again, my wallet and the wallet of the people that I invest in cannot afford to go for those ones. But it will be companies that will create value. They will give exactly 5 times the capital invested in a time frame that is, considered 5 to 7 years. And that's it. And maybe when we sell and then they can become part of this huge corporate, they can become huge. Then there were other type of discussion last time that I was reading that they are calling not the unicorns, but the dragons. So again, everything goes back to the investment thesis, but the investment thesis needs to have a correlation with the resources that you are having. Like if someone tells me that as an angel, that they are literally chasing for unicorns, is because my God, like their wallet is unbelievably generous in order to support that. So yeah, that's a little bit of consistency. And I think that in very diverse ecosystem, it needs to happen. Now, sustainability. What I have seen in many countries is that some startups literally go for that hyper growth. That is like literally 5x is not enough. We're talking about 50x what you need to achieve, something extremely big. And then sometimes, or many times, the startups, you start injecting a lot of capital, and then at the very end, they really need to start burning cash. And that's a little bit of difference of some founders that they have grown organically, and then they actually understood their business model and proved their unit economics. And they understood that, yes, financing is needed to actually grow faster, but the fundamentals are there, rather than others that they are just like literally plugging money And sometimes the founders get totally lost about, okay, I have so much this to spend, so much to grow in terms of team, but who's going to manage the team? Who's going to lead those teams? Where are we going? And then I have seen in many economies, such as Pakistan, startups completely busted because of this hurry about this hyper growth and literally growing without nonsense. And it was going every 18 months into financing rounds with larger tickets, just literally thinking about how to increase my valuation rather than how to increase the value of my business, which is a different ballgame. And that's why after so many busted situations globally, that's when we start to actually witness, all of us, 2 years ago, the what we call the dry financing, the dry VC that is like, no, nowadays we're going to become stronger and seeing that it's not about plugging and injecting capital into a startup without any reasoning. It's okay. First, prove your minimum fundamentals. And also for founders, think, what if I don't have that funding backing? How can actually I can make it? Yeah.
Super interesting. And you mentioned sustainability there, and I know that you're yourself working a lot towards this now. And I just want to know, like, what's your work like? What are you doing towards sustainability?
There are two sides of answering that question. I wish it was only the effort of one individual. So one of the things, again, going back to what I learned in life, that alone is very difficult, is that for an ecosystem to blossom, it needs to have literally key stakeholders starting from the government, going through the universities, trade associations, funds, entrepreneurship, like universities, accelerators, incubators, all of this community to actually walk through the same path. And very important, understanding that, yes, they can compete, but at the very end, it's needed in order for the ecosystem to stay. So that's, let's say, so for example, when they ask us, like, let's say, let's go for a concrete intervention. You just go and train one angel network or help build up one angel network. The number one thing that I say is like, that won't fly. That angel network needs so many things. That needs deal flow coming from the universities. Those angels will need like a legal framework that has been, or a tax framework also. Well, we don't have like here the tax problem, but in many parts of the world, that is a constraint coming from the governments and the policy itself. You will need the other co-investors because you don't have enough your wallet, and that would be so dangerous. So you also need exactly those access to funds, to the grants, so many other things. And then for an angel network, ideally the ones that I have seen is not only one angel network in a country, but 2 to 3, so that they actually curate the deals, they can co-invest, they can do so many things. So I must say that for an ecosystem to become sustainable is the understanding of which are the key stakeholders in each ecosystem, and that they all work together. It cannot be in silos. I was afterwards in as I mentioned before, 3 weeks ago in Peru, and I was seeing like unbelievable, but everyone working in different cities, like completely apart. Even in Pakistan, 1 year and a half that I went, and let's say the national incubator centers, everyone working apart, and I was like, it won't fly this way. It's literally a common effort, a transfer of best practices, so that literally it's not depending on one organization, but is an ecosystem as a whole. So definitely, I think that vision, macro vision, rather than just an institution,
being in
can
silo,
make a difference.
you're looking at your things only. It's a transfer of knowledge
getting to not to see each other as competitors, but there's enough market, let's say, going there, so that people can actually work together. I think that's and understanding all of the parts of the equation. Sometimes it has happened in many countries. No, it's like founders, oh my God, like it's like investors are, they are not there, or they are not investing. Have you actually understood what is happening on their side? Have you understood exactly how many of the portfolio is completely bankrupt? Do you need that type of or do you know if actually the general partner in that fund is in fundraising mode, so then therefore it can't commit to you? So all of this transparency, all of this understanding is needed so that everyone can walk towards the same situation. Even for a country to differentiate. Normally, like I will always say, like even it should come from schools, the mindset of entrepreneurship. When I was in Colombia, entrepreneurship was not even talked about it. I was raised by an entrepreneur, and then maybe that's why I was so open-minded for that. But when we graduated, it was, okay, now you have to go and find a job in corporate and receive a salary. There was not even that mindset there. So one of the things that we are doing in different countries is like, it needs to start. Entrepreneurship should be taught at schools.
That's a curriculum.
As part of the curriculum, so that immediately the individual, since they are learning, they understand what is it about. And actually, it's not, I graduate from university and I jump directly into look for a job. It's actually, I can have the capability to build something and to contribute to society and so on. So it is a value chain where it needs to come from that. Literally put the seeds at the very beginning of the educational life of every single individual until, of course, the sources of funding, the trust, the government. It's a holistic approach. Otherwise, it won't fly.
No, I agree. And all these levers, they act together to create like a unison. So
it's an ecosystem itself.
Yeah, that's exactly what the definition is.
The second part is about what I call the 3 Ps. So literally people, planet, and profit, and in this order. So for me, first comes the people. Second, exactly, needs to be like something that doesn't damage as much as possible the planet. And then the profit will come, but again, I'm not that keen in terms of returns. It's more what is the added value that can be given. So in terms of sustainability, I also think it goes from a deal flow perspective, from the decisions to make. And then actually I learned that in Switzerland from the group of investors. Was called Go Beyond Investing, and then 2 of the co-founders were all the time very vocal about this people, planet, and profit.
You've done a lot of work in the MENA region, but Latin America and Europe as well. And within the startup ecosystems, are there any major changes that you see in all of these regions, or some common behaviors that you can see? What are those? I'd love to know.
So number 1, going back to investors, is the perception of risk. Europe is more conservative. There are different investment instruments, and many of them, when you are giving different clauses and terms, or you are giving some discounts, is literally a correlation between the level of risk and the discount that you're giving. Let's say, for example, in Switzerland and Germany, we see that if it's, if there's a lot of risk, you will be giving higher discounts as a founder for the money that they are giving you. In LATAM, in MENA, that perception is not there. So if it's very risky, it's a 25% discount. If it's less risky, it's a 20% discount. So it's a little bit of that understanding, like there are metrics there, is benchmark, there's perception of risk differs, which is quite interesting. The second thing that also differs, it's the composition of the sources of funding, which many of developed countries, they have the governments allocate strong budgets for research and development. And then you can see those R&Ds and everything in universities and so on. Most emerging countries, the money is not simply there, unfortunately, because there are so many other things that governments need to actually invest in, or they do not invest in, that then there's no priority for that. So then is when you see a little bit of delays from, like, in terms of how many funders have those labs for developing tech that we unfortunately do not find that evident in emerging countries.
Yes, because they're already at a disadvantage now with not having access to those things that developed countries, people might have there.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's why some innovations go, let's say, to stronger economies because they can afford to have it. In many of the emerging countries, I see booming of marketplaces, more like, let's say, deep tech than I'm seeing more, let's say, in the DACH region in Europe. That's a little bit of the difference. The other thing is the behavior of the investors, meaning I was in LATAM 2 months ago. I have been in APAC everywhere and MENA. And then I see a lot of funds, early funds, VC funds, private equity funds, but a complete absence of angels. But let's put it this way, very few angels acting, and the very few that they are, they end up acting very similar like VCs. So there's no this conception of supply chain. But when I was in Switzerland, I learned where, the startup has a founding phase that is the most risky ones, and then is the family, the friends, the fools, the familiars, everyone that actually support them. Then there's this gap of financing, and there's where angels become, and some family office, very entrepreneurial, come and take that part of the investment. And then after, in the later stage, is where the VCs come. If this supply chain is not there, it's very tough for founders, and many VCs need to start actually investing in earlier stage because there's a gap that needs to be filled. And then very good founders will need to find that type of funding. And few angel networks emerging strongly to actually take the deals at an earlier stage than VCs to de-risk a little bit the entire supply chain. That's the other thing. And maybe the last one that I'm very grateful. So before, when I was seeing founders, and then the founders were married couples, for me was a red flag. Immediately, like, oh my God, even this is risky. And on top of that, the couple, like the founders are married. What if this end up in a divorce? What will happen? Then I was invited to work in Pakistan. And I'm at the very beginning, of course, they didn't know me, so they didn't share those stories. But then afterwards, I understood that different of what I thought, actually, it can become a strength when it's a married couple. I'm very thankful and grateful to Pakistan to actually make it change a little bit my personal bias. And I was in Peru. And then I started also to find out, like, you guys are married. And they were like, yeah, but we don't want to say it because many investors look at it as a red flag. And I'm like, no, actually, I have been... The beauty about being so globally exposed is that, yes, in Europe, definitely. But now... I have seen that it can actually be a very good strength. So I don't have that personal bias. So that's a little bit of what I'm seeing that rarely I see in Europe or in other countries. Like, yeah, it's the couples that actually are the founders. I think that was a good lesson learned from this part of the world.
Oh, interesting. And it's one of those things that, being a global citizen, it changes your perspective. You learn and unlearn so many things, right?
Exactly.
Interesting. And then in terms of people who are starting up their businesses, like, they want to be a founder. They know that, they've got something. They want to be creator or founder, but they're not starting yet. Is there any advice that you have for them? Like, is there any, like, what, because you've worked with so many founders as well, when you see or that, you can pinpoint that they're ready now?
That's an excellent question too. What I have seen globally is entrepreneurship is luxury at the very end. Like, it's literally the capability that the individuals have to go for a dream. And at the very beginning, when you are building up, you will not be charging enough salaries, and then you need to be able to afford. So normally, what I must say that in 90% of the cases, I see an individual who wants to jump, what I call with a secure base behind. Is it the family? Is it whatever type of support? Second, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. It literally is not only about the creativity, but it's about juggling so many things at the same time. So the innovation, and most important, seriously, is the risk profile of these founders. If you are an individual who literally needs this financial security in your life, because again, every individual is different, and then you don't dare to take risk, trust me, this is not your asset class. Because whoever, like, first of all, the founder starts, but then there are so many variables that you can control, but so many other ones that you cannot control, such as funding, that then is when you really need, as an entrepreneur, for me, let's say like 3 things. 1, street smart, meaning like, it's not about I need all of the funding in the world. It's with my scarce resources or what I have nowadays with me, what can I build? And I remember once, like long time ago, I was in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and then there was an amazing talk of a founder that said, have you seen the movie Mars? And I was like, yeah, at that time I didn't recall. Then I watched it again. And it was what you can do, what greatness you can do with the limited resources that you have. So that's what I call the street smartness. Sometimes I get with founders, especially some senior more than they have had like successful careers, and I need X, Y, and Z in place in order to actually make it. That's not the entrepreneurship world. Second, the capability to be resilient. Literally, like in all of the startups that I work with, they need at least to pivot their business model 2 to 3 times before actually getting it right. So it's the capability of, not attaching, or it's good to be stubborn, but at the same time, you need, again, that street smartness to say, okay, if this is not working here, if I'm not finding the right unit economics there, if I cannot access the market the way I thought, then I just need to pivot my business model. So that resilience also needs to be there. And then literally that inner strength that you are on your own, because many people ask me sometimes, okay, so how do you spend most of the time with your startups? And I said, I was in Peru 3 weeks ago, and then they were asking me, like, how do you exactly manage so well the startups and so on? And I like, most of the time when we start a relationship, it's always about all of the challenges in terms about business. But then when I start always the conversation, I always say, okay, anything that you would like to share on your personal or on your professional life. And trust me, after we do a little bit of trust and bonding, an important percentage of my time is being a psychologist. Literally, like the therapies that they don't have, because they are all the time like, the things are going super tough. They cannot share with the team members because everyone, is just looking at the leader, at the founder. Okay, like you are the source of inspiration. So you cannot, there are so many things that you, in order to protect the team and the startup, you cannot share. You cannot share with your life partner because they are super invested in the entire thing. And then you also want to protect. So with whom do you share? And that's a little bit where investors or board member governance comes in. Yes, to talk about business, but also to support that human journey. Because at the very end, angel investing or early stage investing, it's about investing in individuals more than the business itself.
Wow, that's so inspiring. So you're acting like, you mentioned like a therapist, like a friend as well, and getting to know them personally. And you're saying that it creates a huge impact in the overall grand scheme of things, because all these other people are depending on them, and the spouses, I'm sure, are already contributing and sacrificing quite a lot already. And how much can you unburden and unload? Yeah. So interesting way to look at it. You worked with entrepreneurs and you worked with founders. Over the course of time, you must be able to identify some common, not say mistakes, but just some general themes that you see, which you would think that they would like to improve on. What would your advice be on?
Number one, understanding that equity is the most expensive debt. Because everyone says, okay, I have this pool of shares. I'm just, I'm going to compensate these shares with everyone. And actually, literally, equity is the most expensive debt, number one. The second one, in very early rounds for entrepreneurs, do not give beyond 10 to 20% of the company to an investor. Why? Because again, this is a long-term, this is a long journey. And then after, it will take, again, 5 to 7 years, even 10. And even if you are in some sectors such as biotech, it will take 12 to 14. So if you start diluting as a founder so early, imagine with what percentage of ownership you will end up in the later days. Do not rush, meaning in terms of, of course, there's the urgency of the money, but also do due diligence and understand all of the strings attached about investment that is coming. Educate yourself. There are so many ways, like literally in the funding, they really need to educate themselves in order to understand that there's no only one way of doing things precisely in funding. A financing round can be between dilutive and non-dilutive funds. So that, let's say, according to the funding. The second and very important one, be as closest to the market as possible, especially the very tech guys. At the very beginning, I have been with founders that they want the perfect product, but then they don't validate the idea, they do not understand if actually there's a market willing to pay for their solution or their product. And so what they ended up is building up in their silo, in their cocoon. And then when they go out, they don't have any other validation. So even from your product perspective, even if you are at a proof of concept stage, start validating your idea and validate literally with a sample size that is representative of the market that you are actually pursuing. So that's number one, like validate as much as you can, be as close to the market and to the potential customers. The other one is, it is true, and I am seeing it a lot, especially in SaaS products, is they understand that the best unit economics would be, let's say, accessing small and medium enterprises and even corporates and so on. And all of us, we understand that accessing that market at the very beginning is tough. Therefore, they need to actually access through startups and many others. But once you validate what you need, do not stay in a sector where the unit economics will not add up. And that's what I'm seeing sometimes. Like, I started with this one because I needed to validate, great. But whenever is a time to do the jump, and actually whenever the product you have seen is ready to go and move forward, to find that ideal customer profile that will actually would love your product and has the willingness to pay the right unit economics and so on, move forward. Do not waste time, in this, like in staying. I continue working on perfecting my product until it's 100% ready. Like product can have all the time an evolution. And one of the things that I have seen in all this time is product market fit is the eternal journey of a founder. Like, things change and then you immediately need to pivot business model and product to find that market fit. So even if whenever you're close to an exit, you might be continuing to find the right market fit. And maybe the last piece is like, you really need to understand your competition. Really. And many times I don't have any direct competitors. Like, my solution is so unique that, and I'm like, either you are literally in a sector where there's no business, and that's why you are the only one, or you haven't done properly your homework. And if you haven't done properly your homework, then that raises a huge red flag, because you will need to understand competition. And you most likely, there might be so many synergies in the future with those competitors that you actually need not only to know them, but start a relationship with them if possible. So that's another one classic mistake that I'm seeing in terms of competitive landscape. Yeah, I think those would be, let's say, the ones that are independent of the sector. They go all the time in terms of financing, product. Yeah, and maybe the very, very end one, it's understand how to do market segmentation. The market is huge. We have a lot of potential. But if you haven't actually understood what is your real market, what is your serviceable, obtainable market, and how are you going to access that market, there's no way you're going to make it. So there's a lot of overestimation on the market. Take time to analyze and do the calculations properly to understand the real market size potential of your opportunity.
To get the basics right, understand. And then from a founder's perspective, how do they find the right investors, and what should they be looking forward to?
Yeah. So it goes back to values, literally. Like, you will need the money. And then one of the main questions I always ask the founders is, what do you want in life? Do you want, and then there's an amazing paper from Harvard Business Review that says the difference between king and rich. If you want to be the king, literally, or queen, and then you actually, want to all the time hold your baby, then maybe the type of investor that you need is not these like VC funds or or even private equity funds that they have investment thesis and a literally fiduciary responsibility behind, so that the money really needs to grow and, it needs to be a hyper growth business. There are sources of funding, but you need to understand for the type of business that you are building up. On top of that, the returns that you're expecting to give to others, because at the very end, when you want to pick, in many cases, I see I want to buy back the shares, meaning the founder, of everyone that has invested in oneself. And I'm like, yeah, but then normally those kinds of exits, historically speaking, we have seen that are not the most generous ones. So that's number one, exactly. What do you want? Many others say, listen, no, I just want to be rich. I'm building this one, selling, and and ready for the next challenge. And they love the adrenaline of hyper growth, and they really want to go, literally, they have this global mindset and so on. So, of course, go for it. If you are in a market that actually has that potential and you have access to that market, and of course if your product has that market fit, then fine, you can go for, like, for this dream. So that's a little bit of this first understanding about what am I building and what are my expectations, because everything comes with a cost. Like in the moment that, and that's why so many times to founders, especially in early stage, they always say, like, I am looking for VCs. And I'm like, you are not a VC fit, or you are not even an equity fit. Meaning there are so many great entrepreneurs that have built their businesses using other sources of funding rather than equity investors. So it's that understanding of what you want to build, and what you can offer. Because I always said that one of the main things when I was fundraising, an investor told me, which was brilliant, and he said, like, every time that you are pitching, take into account that me, when I'm listening to you, I'm wondering how on earth is she gonna give me my money back? Because I'm not doing philanthropy here. And that was so that is before going out and looking for the right investor. I won't say look for the right investor. Understand the sources of funding that your company needs. Understand what you want for your business. And then afterwards, things will be better aligned. And then if you decide it's an equity investor, it will be someone, like, if you really want to go for hyper growth and all of these things and you're in the right sector, then you will end up understanding who are the investors, the funding that they need. And the last piece that I will say to every founder is due diligence goes in both ways, meaning they always think that the investors are the only ones entitled to ask questions. And I always say due diligence is also on your side.
Both ways.
To try to understand if this is the right fit. So dare to ask at the very beginning, what's your investment thesis? Can you connect me with any of the companies that you have invested in? I want to understand how is that, daily relationship, if there's any daily or annual relationship, what am I getting into?
Yeah.
And then very few of them actually dare to take that risk. Yeah.
Because it's not comfortable.
They don't feel comfortable, or I don't know, this culture that, and I always say at the very end, like going back to market, you are the product. You are like the most important client for any investor.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be the other way around.
It sounds a bit like also like a job interview when you're in the final stage of the salary negotiations or other things. And they say, do you have a question? And you're very mindful of what exactly are you asking.
Exactly. Because I don't want to, and these are long-term relationships. That's another difference with other asset class. Like this is illiquid. You cannot exit the day of tomorrow. You should be doing the due diligence on both sides.
And Maria, for entrepreneurs who are just in the beginning of their journey, what would you tell them about planning their exit strategy, and how early should they be thinking about it?
So, again, the ones that decided that they are equity fit, so that they are comfortable giving shares of their company, what I will always say is like that wise advice of that investor that if I am willing to open my company for equity investment is because I will need to have at least a plan of how to give the money back. And it's true that many investors say, no, I want you to focus on creating value. I'm 100% with that one. But at the same time, you will also need to understand and plan ahead a little bit how that exit will look like. So number one is educate yourself, because normally when I started in this world, I only thought there were three classic type of exit. One, the founders buying back the shares. Second, trade sale, that is simply like, a corporate buying the startup. And the third one, it was the IPO. That is what everyone dreams about. But then afterwards, when I have been so exposed on everything, there are 9 ways of exiting companies, and in so many different ways, or that you as a founder can offer investors to exit in many different ways. So I will say that educate themselves in that one, and trying to understand, because that, and I'm not saying that will be the end goal, but it's part of that goal and the minimum responsibility that at some point you will need to give the money back. So feel more comfortable with that concept, because many times what I see is that when you talk about exit, it's uncomfortable for both sides, and it needs to be comfortable, because at the very end, that's exactly when you open and you decide that you're giving shares and receiving some money, is because you're creating value, building up something new. But at the very end, at some point, I will need my money back for my return, and because I bet on or I believe, I'm trusting in your success. So your success is my success, but then how are we going to make it happen? So that I will say. Now, in terms of, like, again, every sector is different. Every sector has different benchmarks and so on. And that's why it's so important to understand competition, because there are sometimes when you start seeing, oh my God, like there's a lot of consolidations happening. There's a concept that happened in one part of the world, and there's this big company that says, rather than inventing the wheel in that part of the world, I just buy this company out. So, that's the importance of understanding who's the competition globally, so that you can be in the radar and actually try to understand if there might be opportunities there or not.
And at the rate at which we're having changes and adaptability in this industry, how do you see the future of early stage investing?
I would love to see a little bit more democratized, so that people understand that it can be part of their portfolios. For example, we invest in stocks, we invest in ETFs, in real estate, and so on, so that this asset class can become part of a normal portfolio of investors, with the right instruments, with the right education, so that, because at the very end, if you abstract and you look the asset class that you're investing in, one of the things that I love is that if the founder goes well, they are giving job creation in the country, capital mobilization. And those are critical things that, for example, when it came the crisis of 2010, every time that there's an economic and internet, like literally a financial crisis, you see emerging new sectors. Let's go back to 2010. It was a circular economy emerging. It was a shared economy, the Airbnbs and so on, that before they didn't exist before that crisis. So it's a moment that literally propels innovation, but at the same time that if things go right, it will be creating value to the countries where these founders are. So it's important to see it, that it can be as important as real estate from an economic development motor in a society.
And how do you think communities play a role in this? Because I feel like even for investors, is how important it is to have a community around you.
I think that, again, you can do your solo journey or with someone else. And I'm a believer in everything in life that, first of all, you don't know it all. Second is the power of the community, where you can leverage everyone's literally skills, mindset, and resources to make it happen. So I do think communities are important both ways. And then you're touching in something very important. I have had the literally pleasure and luxury of working in so many countries developing precisely those communities. And what I always say to the founders when I'm there is like, I'm just only a resource, but the most important wealth that you can take out of all of these accelerators or taking out of all of these programs is the network that you are building up. Because for not only for the company and the funding, every network gets a saturation. And you will need to tap into other networks to actually become, for the entire thing to become greater and actually being able to achieve. So you will need those type of communities on both sides. So for founders, don't see each other as competitors. You can, I have seen so many things, like one founder had a special need in his startup or her startup, and then precisely the individual that was in the same program, because they never talk, and finally ended up in a program that they can exchange ideas. They actually could found the right solution that they were looking for, or synergies, customers, referrals for investors, so many things. So definitely I believe in the power of community for both sides.
And it makes me think, are there any industries, as times are emerging and different things are changing, so any particular industries that you're leaning towards as an investor now?
Yeah, I'm becoming very interested in silver economy. I'm
Really?
starting to see that literally the population is aging. There's a lot in terms of healthcare developments that need to be done. So definitely that's one. And the second one that is like the one that is impacting all of us, that is climate tech. We really need solutions. We really need to live our lives in a different way. So definitely climate. And this one, I haven't been active, but I want to start to be active going back to climate, and it's about food tech. Literally to understand how different resources how do we nurture ourselves? How do we respect the limited resources that the world can give us and so on? That is something that I'm starting to lean towards. Yeah.
What is Maria doing right now? I know that you've taken a small break, so I'm really curious to know what's on your mind. What are you thinking ahead?
So I'm in an exploration mode.
Okay.
I think I have shared that in the past. So I have two daughters, and my younger one is special needs. And I think that the most powerful organ that we have in our bodies is, well, besides the heart, it's the brain.
Yeah.
So I am starting to explore neuroplasticity, consciousness, how to help new generations, not even, let's say, my daughter in special needs, but many others, to find those synapses in their brains, or how to nurture the brains and everything, so that in the future, most importantly, you could be an individual that understands yourself pretty well, can be happy, and can be fulfilled. So that's a little bit where I'm starting to educate myself, getting a little bit more acquainted with startups that are developing so many apps to, develop this neuroplasticity, this consciousness, so that at the very end, individuals might understand that this world is full of opportunities, and equip them of how to actually, get the best out of it. At the same time, with this race and this moment of AI everywhere, that in every single startup or in every single investment committee that I am, there's like a strong emphasis, like, let's go for AI. And sometimes a lot of the AI that we are seeing or that comes to us is literally this brainwashing that is not profound AI. So I also think, going back, that we really need to start, all of us, being educated about AI. And how AI can actually, rather than becomes only the knowledge of few people, can become of everyone, so that all of us, we can leverage and we can have a better standard of living and a better fulfillment of what you're doing in life through that. So it's not, so I think the combination of neuro, like all of the part of the brain, consciousness, AI, and understanding how to create those tools or that knowledge available for everyone, so that in the future they can be happy and excel. That is what matters the most, and a more inclusive world. Because that's one of the things, the journeys that I have seen. I have been super blessed in life. My husband, everyone, we operate, we have everything, all the skills, and then it has been, despite where the country that we come from, we have done global careers and many important things. But it's a world that needs more inclusion, because not everyone is born, let's say, not everyone needs to be in the same way. So how to create a more inclusive world, maybe that's a little bit also in that exploration phase of how can I contribute with some of the skills and knowledge that I have in order to create a more inclusive world.
And how I see is that, you've done so much work, and now I feel like you're going after the purpose-led work.
Yeah, I think so too.
I wish you the best of luck, Maria.
Thank you.
And it was a pleasure to have you on the show and to learn from you. And I'm sorry I asked you so many questions, but it's eye-opening as well for myself, and I hope for the general wider audience as well.
No, and thank you for inviting me. I'm super flattered when I received the invitation. I was like, I love it. very happy to be here, and hopefully like people can find a little bit of insightful this conversation in whatever they are doing in their daily lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you found this episode interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.